In the shadow of a castle, amidst the whispers of scandal and outrage, a tale unfolds that strips away the glittering facade of chivalry and reveals the harsh realities of medieval life. Imagine a king, revered and powerful, who, in a moment of unchecked desire, commits an act so heinous that it would shock even the most hardened of warriors. This is the story of King Edward III of England and the Countess of Salisbury, a tale that exposes the dark underbelly of courtly love and the brutal truths of power. Edward III, the King of England, was a man who ruled with an iron fist and a charismatic charm. His reign, marked by grandeur and warfare, was also marred by moments of darkness that lay hidden beneath the chivalric ideals of the time. One such moment occurred during a visit to Salisbury Castle in 1342. The castle, a fortress of stone and history, stood as a symbol of power and nobility. Within its walls, the beautiful Countess of Salisbury, wife of the Earl of Salisbury, lived a life of elegance and grace. But on this day, the castle's halls would echo with a different kind of story. Froissart, the chronicler of the time, tells a sanitized version of the events. He writes that King Edward, after a battle in Scotland, was struck by a sparkle of fine love for the Countess. When she politely but firmly rejected his advances, the king, a man of chivalry, respected her wishes and left. But another contemporary, Jean Labelle, a knight-turned-chronicler, tells a far darker story. According to Labelle, King Edward, driven by his lust and the power of his position, did not let the Countess's rejection deter him. He sent her husband, the Earl of Salisbury, on a mission to Brittany, away from the castle, and then returned to make his advances again. This time, when the Countess refused, he raped her, stopping her mouth with such force that she could only cry 2 or 3 cries. The violence left her bleeding from the nose, mouth, and other parts, and in a swoon. The Countess, forever changed by the trauma, never found joy or happiness again. When her husband returned, she confided in him, sitting on the bed and crying as she recounted the brutal act. The Earl, a man of honor and friendship with the king, was torn. He felt betrayed and dishonored, not only by the act itself, but by the violation of the trust that had bound him to the king. In a dramatic gesture, he went to court and divested himself of his lands, ensuring his wife would have her dowry for life. Then, standing before the king, he declared, "You have villainously dishonored me and thrown me in the dung," and left the country, a broken man. The scandal rocked the nobility, and the king was widely condemned. But this incident was not an isolated event. It was a stark reminder that the ideals of chivalry, while noble in theory, were often far from the reality of medieval life. The code of chivalry, with its emphasis on honor, courtesy, and valor, was a veneer that barely concealed the underlying violence, greed, and sensuality of the time. Joinville's account of the Crusaders at Damietta in 1249 shows knights plunging into brutality, blasphemy, and debauchery. The Teutonic Knights, in their annual raids on Lithuania, hunted peasants for sport, embodying the dark side of medieval warfare. The broader context of this period is one of constant conflict and struggle. Edward III's first campaign in France, halted by the Truce of 1342, was marked by a naval battle off Sluys, where the English, armed with the revolutionary longbow, defeated the French fleet. The longbow, with its range of 300 yards and rapid firing rate, was a game-changer in medieval warfare. Edward, recognizing the importance of this weapon, prohibited all sports except archery and offered incentives to those who produced the bows and arrows. The longbow's dominance in the Battle of Sluys gave England command of the Channel, a crucial advantage in the ongoing conflict with France. But the war was about more than just military strategy. It was a complex mix of political, economic, and psychological factors. Edward wanted to secure the ultimate sovereignty of Guienne and Gascony, regions that had been part of the English crown through the marriage of Eleanor of Aquitaine to his ancestor, Henry II. The French, however, retained superior sovereignty, allowing the inhabitants to appeal to the French king, which created endless conflict. The economic importance of these regions, with their fertile valleys, long coast, and network of navigable rivers, made them a valuable asset. England imported wine and other goods from these regions, while sending wool and cloth in return, generating significant revenue. Edward III, a young king at the time, was driven by a desire for power, glory, and the appearance of a righteous cause. His claim to the French crown, while perhaps not entirely serious, gave him the legal and moral justification needed to rally support and wage war. The concept of a just war was essential in the 14th century, providing a basis for requisitioning feudal aids and securing God's favor. The right to pillage, or the right of spoil, was also a significant incentive, as it allowed soldiers to plunder the unjust enemy and claim the spoils of war as a reward. The war in Brittany, a region with its own complex feudal loyalties, further complicated the conflict. The rivalry between Jean Comte de Montfort and Jean de Penthièvre for the dukedom of Brittany became a focal point of the war. Montfort, supported by England, and Charles de Blois, supported by France, engaged in a brutal struggle that saw acts of extreme violence and cruelty. Charles de Blois, a man of extreme piety, combined his religious fervor with a ferocious pursuit of power. His methods, including the throwing of heads into besieged cities and the massacre of civilians, were brutal but not uncommon in the context of medieval warfare. The story of King Edward III and the Countess of Salisbury, and the broader context of the 100 Years' War, serves as a sobering reminder of the complexities and contradictions of medieval life. Chivalry, while a noble ideal, was often a thin veneer over a world of violence and power struggles. The human cost of these conflicts was high, and the scars left by such acts of betrayal and violence would last for generations. As we reflect on this history, we are reminded that the ideals we hold dear are often far from the reality of human nature and the choices we make in the face of power and desire.